incredibly warm welcome to everybody and to what do we know and where are we going? A briefing on devolution in Sussex. My name is Richard Freeman, and I'm the founder of Insights engagement and evaluation agency Always Possible. And I'm the lead on the Sussex and the City project. And this marks 30 years since I first moved to Sussex. I'm very proud of it. So over 100 people have signed up to join live today. And if you've just joined the session, welcome. And we've got many more looking forward to catch up on the recording as well. So it's really encouraging that engagement around this complex, messy, hopeful issue is growing and growing. But it's also about breadth. Looking at the sign-up list this morning, I can see we have everybody from professors to students, business CEOs to community organisers, politicians to artists, think tanks to food growers. So do introduce yourselves in the chat and use the Q&A function throughout if you have questions. And I hope you do, and I hope you have lots. And we'll sort of deal with questions in periods as we go rather than waiting all to the end. So do fire questions as we go in the Q&A section for any of our speakers, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. So a quick little bit of context. The Sussex and the City project was set up exactly a year ago in response to lots of noise and rumours and speculation about Sussex and Brighton joining the UK government's devolution priority programme. And the promise was the transfer of powers and millions of pounds of extra funding from Whitehall down to Sussex. Strategic, long-term and joined-up thinking that might put Sussex on the investment map. We initially expected to be electing a mayor in next week's elections. And we had 6 candidates starting to vie for attention before Christmas. And at the same time, 14 out of 15 Sussex local authorities were told were going to be scrapped and then rebuilt into something new, and all at breakneck speed. Well, we're still on that roller coaster, but with many delays, clarifications, new ideas, arguments, and partnerships beginning to shape something that will be the future of the Sussex economy, prosperity, and quality of life for generations to come. So this afternoon, we've got an opportunity to take a step back and to consider where we are in that journey and what comes next. And I'm delighted to be joined by some expert special guests to help me do that. So here's how we're going to roll. First, we're going to hear from Akash Paun, who will be giving us a national perspective on English devolution, why, where, how, and where Sussex and Brighton sits within the bigger picture. Akash is director of the devolution programme at the Institute for Government and an influential thinker and advisor on the subject. I've been reading his work, watching his webinars, listening to him speak at events with fevered interest for over a year now, so delighted he can join us live and share some wisdom today. And then we're going to hear from Mark Rogers, the Interim Chief Executive of the brand new Brighton and Sussex Strategic Authority. Mark really is the lead architect of devolution in Sussex at the moment, helping turn the policy and the politics into something tangible. Mark was the CEO of Birmingham City Council when the West Midlands became a devolved region, and then went on to lead the setup of both the Hull and East Yorkshire and East Midlands authorities. So we really are in experienced hands, and I'm very grateful that the busiest man in Sussex right now is also able to join us live, and live from the United States. So looking forward to hearing from him. And then we will hear from Natalie Orringe, a big voice in Sussex these days on all things communications and strategy. Natalie has bags of experience on public sector comms, humanising complex change, as well as private and charity sector PR and engagement, and runs her own Brighton-based consultancy, Strategy and Impact. And Natalie will be revealing a completely brand new, launched today, platform called the Sussex Intelligence Unit, which I'm very excited about. So more on that later. And then at the end, I'm going to briefly kind of summarise what I've learned and heard from over 100 civic, business and community leaders that I've interviewed as part of the Sussex and the City project. Just some headlines on themes and trends that might steer future conversations. But as I say, we'll pause for questions at different points all the way through. So I hope you find today useful, whatever your level of engagement so far. And please do add your questions as we go, and I will put them to each speaker following their presentations. So enough from me, and I'm going to hand over to Akash to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Richard. Okay, so I shall share my slides with everybody. And Yeah, well, I'm just doing that just to say, yeah, thanks very much for the invitation and very kind introduction you just made. Why have I just lost sight of the share screen button? Apologies all.
I
Uh,
knew it was going too well when we tested the tech.
don't worry, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Just give us a sec, everybody. Apologies for that. Okay.
There we go.
And switch to the right mode. Okay, great. So yeah, well, so good afternoon, everyone. Really great to be here and take part in this conversation. I'm, as mentioned, program director for devolution at the Institute for Government. For those of us who haven't heard of us, IFG is a cross-party independent think tank based in Westminster, and our mission is to improve the effectiveness across the UK, including at the devolved level. And that's, of course, what I am here to talk with you about today, to take part in this conversation about the state of play with the devolution agenda at the national level, as well as specifically in the context of Sussex and Brighton. Um, as far as my background's concerned, I should say I do have some family connections with Sussex and Brighton. I lived for a little bit in Brighton. My family, my parents and brothers live there now. I can't claim to be the big expert on the local specific circumstances, but that's why you've got Richard, Mark, and Natalie on the call to deliver their presentations that will be more specifically focused, I'm sure, on the local circumstances. I am here hopefully to bring a broader overview of the state of play with this agenda and to offer some reflections about the challenges and opportunities ahead for Sussex and Brighton and indeed other places on the devolution journey. And it is quite a good moment, I think, to be having this conversation. It's just a day, people will be aware, I'm sure, after the government's English Devolution Act finally got royal assent. And it's just a week before that big set of local elections, which, well, I will come back to that, but may well have a significant impact on how devolution progresses over the coming period. So, just to start with, oh yeah, that's just what I'll hopefully cover, as mentioned already. In terms of a good starting point, I think it's just worth looking back at what it is that Labour has committed to and why. Because Labour came into power nearly 2 years ago, of course, now. Talking quite a big game, if you like, about its intention to deliver a devolution revolution, kind of major shift of power away from the centre to cities and counties and localities across England. And I think maybe they got a little bit carried away. I don't think when we look back now, I'd quite say we've seen or we are seeing a revolution. But I like to be kind of glass half full as a pro-devolutionist. I do think some important changes have been or are in the process of being implemented, and there are genuine opportunities being opened up for places, I think, to take control of their own destiny more. So, in terms of Labour's vision, there's a lot of detail in across a wide range of changes they're bringing in. But I think the broad analysis they came in with, and it's one that I share, and like IFG was arguing this before 2024. In the hope that the incoming government would take this kind of view, was that we had a devolution landscape in England that was too messy, too inconsistent. The country as a whole was still too centralized, but the devolution we had seen was in this slightly ad hoc, deal by deal based way that really didn't allow for the emergence of regional government as a consistent tier of administration with a established set of responsibilities. And Labour, I think, really did want to move beyond that messiness to something a bit more comprehensive. And this is just their graphic from the white paper of 2024, which set out that the ambition to create strategic authorities, so groups of local authorities coming together at the regional scale, to take a lead on predominantly economic functions, but interpreted fairly broadly. We'll come back to some of the powers. Um, and the aspiration early on was for that model to eventually cover the whole of England. And then below that, we've seen, of course, the launch of this major reform of local government with the intention to create just a single tier of councils, replacing counties and districts in those areas where we still have two-tier local government, including East and West Sussex, of course. So the idea was we'd end up with this relatively standard three tiers, you might say parishes as well below that of government all across England that would bring greater coherence, greater transparency and understanding among the public. So that was the idea. In terms of what's happened so far, well, quite a lot of specifics to get into. I mean, at a big picture level, I mean, the passage just yesterday, as I say, of the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Act, to give it its full title, I think is a big moment. There's always going to be criticisms of the limitations on what's being devolved and so on. But what it does do for the first time is create a single framework for what is on offer and what is to be devolved by default to all places as they create strategic authorities. And that's, I think, a big step forward from that messy ad hoc approach we had seen incrementally emerge over the previous decade. I mean, within that framework, we have, before I go on to the specific powers, this is a framework with different tiers. So we have foundation strategic authorities. Those are places that won't have mayors, that don't have mayors. They will get fewer powers. You'll then have mayoral strategic authorities. That's your kind of entry level mayoral devolution package. That's what Sussex and Brighton will hopefully become in 2028. And then the leading places, your Greater Manchesters, your Liverpools and West Midlands and others, are what's known as established mayoral strategic authorities, and they get further powers and freedoms within the framework. But we do have that consistency. The powers on offer, I mean, the core of it remains those drivers of economic growth, and the framework and the bill sets these out in those areas: transport, housing, planning, regeneration, adult skills, in that consistent way. So any mayoral strategic authority, and indeed places like Sussex and Brighton, even before they get a mayor, will take on some of these powers and an expectation that they'll use them to drive growth through local growth plan and spatial development strategy and those key joined up visions for the region. So in those areas, without getting into the specifics due to lack of time, there are some quite useful functions, whether that's the ability to take control of the local buses, as places like Greater Manchester have done, the ability to lead on brownfield regeneration, to set up mayoral development corporations, control of the adult skills fund. I mean, these are some of the key specific levers within those broad fields that are being devolved. What we also see, which I think is quite interesting as part of this model, is the establishment of other broad areas of competence, like those ones on the screen, that where there aren't particular or very few specific powers being devolved, but what there is, in the way I see it, is a kind of expectation being set that over time, mayors, strategic authorities, local leaders in general will take on a greater role in things like promoting public health, closing health inequalities, promoting culture, supporting climate objectives, and improving the natural environment. So in those areas, you have these broad fields of competence in sort of legal terms, or areas of competence set out in the law, and then a process by which over time, through this, what they call the right to request mechanism, mayors will be able to request specific functions, and the government will be at least required by law to consider and respond to those reasoned requests. It may end up saying no in most cases. We'll see how it plays out. But that is seen as quite a big win for the mayors, at least those established leading set of mayors. And I know they're really thinking very hard at the moment about how to use it and what to ask for. So that's the sort of prize on the horizon for places like Sussex and Brighton, who are obviously a few steps off from that, but that's where it leads to. Um, the bill also strengthens mayors in certain ways. The government is keen on the mayoral model, at least where it can get agreement for that. So there's changes to voting processes and so on that will make it easier for mayors to lead and get his or her strategies through the mayoral the strategic authority board. That's getting a bit technical, but basically the direction of travel is to strengthen mayors as the real core leaders of regions. There's also some important reforms going on to how strategic authorities are funded, in particular, the creation of this new, much more flexible, integrated settlement model, which basically means that instead of a mayoralty getting several dozen different budgets from different parts of government for very specific functions, they'll get more like a single pot that they can allocate in light of local preferences. It won't work exactly like that because different departments will still have expectations and accountability mechanisms to ensure that certain things are delivered. But broadly speaking, that's the direction of travel. The government's also now talking about fiscal devolution. The Chancellor made a speech just a month or so ago, I think, talking about potential for mayoralties to perhaps be given a share of income tax revenue or fuller control of business rates or other taxes, and that could really kind of give them that funding certainty that hasn't always been in place in the past. I'll skip over that. So that's the kind of big agenda that I think they have genuinely made big progress on. At the same time, of course, um, alongside the deepening devolution agenda, there's been a big commitment to widening. It's useful, I think, to think about these two different axes of the process. And specifically by that, I mean the extension of devolution beyond the 50% or so of England in population terms that are currently covered by mayors. And again, to go back to the early days of this government, when it was Angela Rayner and Jim McMahon leading on it, real, I think, quite strong believers in almost devolution as a constitutional agenda, and a democratic agenda. There was this promise to complete the map, to offer devolution to everywhere, basically. And that led eventually to the 6 areas, including Sussex and Brighton, being on the fast track devolution priority program, but with an expectation at that point that that was just the first of a number of waves of further devolution agreements. Um, this is the picture as it stands. I mean, the chart on the left of the screen just shows the incremental coverage of devolution growing over the past decades in terms of share of the economy, population, and land. As I say, up to about 50% now. Aspiration to hit at least 2/3 by the end of the Parliament. And on the right, that's what the map looks like, with the priority areas shaded in grey. So, I mean, if all of those agreements were to go ahead, do go ahead as planned, um, we'll start to see devolution almost as the norm rather than the exception, and then hopefully the further momentum will be found to extend to other places still left out. But that's where we are now. Of course, what we've seen more recently is a slowdown in progress. So the elections planned for this year have been pushed back in those 6 areas to either 2027 in a couple of cases or 2028 in the other cases, including Sussex and Brighton. And I think what we saw over the course of the last 8 months or so since the government reshuffle of last September was a bit of a shift in approach. There is a bit more.
Hi, everybody
So Richard.
sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were cutting me off. I am aware of the time there, so I'll be quick through these last bits. But yeah, I think what we've seen is a maybe a weakening of commitment to that big systematic vision of devolution, greater welcoming or acceptance of messiness still. And government, to go back to the passage of the devolution bill just this week, perhaps quite significantly, gave up in the face of pressure from the House of Lords on what it was seeking to legislate for, which was the power to effectively impose mayors, even if local councils, local authorities did not give their consent, which has been the model thus far. As part of that commitment to complete the map, government saw the need to take on a power it was never going to use often, but in certain circumstances to make devolution happen. Well, it doesn't have that now, so that may well mean that progress really does slow down and becomes a lot more messy. And I think we definitely expect to see non-mayoral devolution with fewer powers in more places at that sort of foundation strategic authority level. And so, yeah, overall, I sorry, but I'm at 15 minutes, I'm aware. So I'll just quickly end with a couple of brief reflections on what might we therefore expect looking ahead. So the local elections as this big moment, I think, for Keir Starmer for lots of reasons, but certainly for this agenda as well. Because I think, for one thing, the more Labour sees local and regional government as dominated by opposition parties, the less it's likely to be that keen on giving power away. So I think that's one thing to some extent we might have already seen, but over the last year, but that might happen even more. Um, we're also, of course, the more we see non-Labour local authorities expecting to see more opposition to the agenda, and that's including both devolution and perhaps more so local government reorganisation. But government having tied those things together may have kind of created a rod for its own back, I would argue. Um, then national politics, who knows, frankly, but reshuffle seems likely, if not even at the top in the top job in number 10. That could lead to any different number of changes, which could be positive or negative for this agenda. Who knows? Prime Minister Burnham may be quite pro devolution, or Rayner, just to pluck something out of the air. But it really depends how things play out. But it creates that uncertainty in the short term. And then within MSAs, MCAs, the other thing we might see start to happen is political fragmentation, making it a lot harder to reach consensus, the consensus on which this model is founded. Mayors are not able to just push things, they are being strengthened a bit, but they're not able to just push things through unilaterally. If we see in lots of these places, look out next week for example, the Northeast, I think West and South Yorkshire, West Midlands even. We see in those places Labour mayors maybe trying to work with lots of reform and in some places Green Lib Dem leaders. That's democracy, folks, but it might just mean this system starts to run into some difficulties in terms of its ability to take the kinds of decisions government is looking to it to do. So I'll end on the final note that Sussex and Brighton, of course, has created its new combined authority. Luckily, perhaps got that through. Very pleased to see that happen, and looking forward to hearing from Mark on progress with establishing the institution. Because I think looking ahead, it might be we look back on this moment and realise that Sussex and Brighton was one of the last MSAs that kind of got out of the door before it potentially closes. But for you in this region, obviously that means there is that opportunity to take on the powers coming down the track. Use the period between now and 2028 to deliver on some key priorities and prepare hopefully for the mayoral election in 2 years' time. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully that was useful, and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Akash. Really, really helpful overview on the national picture and all the context and some of the nuances. My huge apologies to people who've arrived a little bit late. It does seem that a stray link somehow to a Google Meet was sent. So there's a whole bunch of people waiting in a completely different space. So I'll investigate that, but I thought it was all going too swimmingly. So hopefully most people are in now. Um, so questions for Akash. One from Kat Fisher's come through. She's asked, could you say a bit more about the right to request and what might mayoralties be able to request beyond more fiscal powers?
Absolutely. The basic model is that I said a little bit about that without getting into too much detail, but the Devolution Act now sets out these 9 relatively broad areas of competence, and those are things like transport, skills and employment, housing and regeneration. I won't remember all of them, culture, rural affairs, um, local economic development, things like that. And the idea, and then the idea of the right to request power is that mayors individually or collectively working together through the UK Mayors Group or something like that can put in a request for a specific function that falls within one of those broad areas of competence. So in theory, that's quite open-ended. I don't think it does necessarily apply to fiscal devolution. That, of course, there's, in general, mayors can request powers just as a normal part of politics, if you like. And there has, of course, been dialogue about that underway for a while. And now we've seen the Chancellor and the Treasury kick off a piece of work thinking about what fiscal devolution might look like. And there's a promise to make some specific, maybe not commitments, but set out a route map in the autumn budget. But as I understand it, the right to request will be maybe we want to take control of this employment program or take on this specific it could be a quite wide ranging set of things, but within those nine broad areas. And I don't know how much of this is going to be in the public domain. I think that's going to be quite interesting to watch, because now it has a statutory basis. There's a sort of formal process to it. The bids will go in. They will be considered at the Council of Mayors, chaired by the Secretary of State. There'll be some kind of formal response from government, and I'd hope there's a bit more transparency emerges about how that works over the coming period. Because I mean, it's something I've long said long thought is it's not always going to be right for a power to be devolved, but I think the government should explain its reasoning rather than, for sometimes quite opaque reasons, just decide, oh yeah, we're going to give up this function to this area but not to this area, or those kind of odd decision-making processes we've seen in the past.
So I see Claire from Fabrica's got a hand up. I'll bring you in to ask the question live if you'd like in a second. Just going to ask one from Rohan first. I believe Bexhill Museum, I think. What will the Strategic Authority advise, guide the LGR process at district level? Maybe this is a question for Mark later, but I just wondered from your perspective how, there's these two things happening at once, and the government is being accused of sort of making a rod for its own back in doing that. How much from your perspective do you see the new strategic authorities and the LGR process happening simultaneously, being symbiotic, or and how much one might influence the other, particularly in terms of the new strategic authorities?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the sequencing of this has been changed in a way that I think, if you look at it from a blank start, or from a blank sheet of paper sort of perspective, it probably does make sense to do take the LGR decisions first before creating the mayoralty. I do see the logic of that from the government perspective. I mean, I think they made a big mess of it and making commitments that they then rode back on in the way they've done in terms of sequencing has really been um, definitely not well managed from a government perspective. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think obviously the strategic authority in Sussex and Brighton exists now. It is comprised of the current three upper tier authorities in the region who all have their own different positions
Mm.
on LGR and on their preferred model vision for the new boundaries and so on. So yeah, I mean, if Mark's able to shed light on that stuff
Yeah, I mean,
or wants to, I'd be
Mark,
fascinated.
Mark,
But
Mark, Mark will have a view. I think from my perspective, I think the two things happening simultaneously, whilst complicated. I know lots of people are very worried about LGR, but actually the devolution and the setup of authority does seem to be an area where cross party politics has actually aligned and kind of looked in the same direction, and people have been able to overcome some of
yeah,
the more hyperlocal politics. So in a way, that's probably been quite helpful. But yes, we'll definitely get Mark's view on that. The question from Jess Sumner from Community Works. Um, Trying to ensure different sectors are heard in the process takes time and work, with the potential for change and uncertainty due to elections. Is there learning from other established areas around whether developments are seen as positive, uh, whether developments are seen as a positive step and are therefore likely to survive any election results? As you're kind of picking up here, Akash, there's real concern about next week's elections really disrupting the sort of apple cart and all the work that's been done to date. So I guess the question is, have there been in other areas that have been as politically sort of unstable, but where the devolution process has sort of superseded that and still been able to bring lots of people with it?
yeah. I mean, I think as I said myself, I'm watching like everybody very carefully to see what happens next week and afterwards, and it's going to be, I think, quite destabilizing in a number of places. Just the scale of changes of political control we expect to see. I mean, in terms of lessons from elsewhere, the reality is that most of the certainly the early waves of mayors or devolution deals, the ones in the kind of big city regions in the north in particular, they've all mostly been single party dominated, i.e. Labour, uh, with some exceptions though. But Greater Manchester, Liverpool, West and South Yorkshire, those have all been Labour mayors with majority or sometimes 100%
Mm.
Labour council control across the region. And yeah, I mean, naturally that makes it easier, though, being from the same party doesn't mean that when it comes to decisions around planning or housing or investment, there aren't still differences that emerge. It's not all about party politics, is it? But yeah, I mean, there are places that have made it work despite party misalignment. I mean, I think West Midlands is quite interesting in that respect. We had Conservative mayor for the first two terms, Andy Street, and the balance was shifted over that period at council level. But I think for a large part of that time, it was majority Labour council control on the combined authority, and he got quite a lot done, I think. And there definitely were arguments between mayor and local authorities that frustrated some objectives, made it harder to take decisions, but um, it didn't all collapse, or because there was still that shared recognition of devolution means we're getting these extra resources, we're getting control of these levers of growth, we've got a higher visible profile in national debate, we've got someone who can speak to investors, all those things that devolution offers. Um, and yeah, I think in that case, and there's others I could point to, Tees Valley, more controversy in some respects in terms of some of the stuff Ben Houchen's done there. But again, he's kind of put the place on the map and shown the ability to work with leaders predominantly from the other party, another party, by putting place before party and really focusing on the shared interests of the region. So it can be done, would be
Yeah,
my simple conclusion from that.
brilliant. And last question for you. I think more around local government reorganisation. So John asks. So he's I think looking at through a Hampshire lens, which is
Mm.
obviously one of the priority areas that has been given its decision from MHCLG around the new unitary authorities, as has Greater Essex and Suffolk and Norfolk. We're yet to wait. We're still waiting for our decision here in Sussex. But his question is, how much is there potential movement post that decision? Even if like somewhere like Hampshire, where government says this is what we think, you know, is there still flexibility for that to be kind of worked up and negotiated, or is the government decision when they get the letter a kind of tablet of stone? What's your kind of feeling at the moment in terms of that in the current LGR process?
I mean, this is not a government that has always stuck to a single position
It's a very
consistently
diplomatic
over
way of putting
time.
it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's not, it's nothing as a tablet of stone. Nothing is absolutely finalized until it's been implemented, you might say. So yeah, where are we up to in as you say, those other parts of the priority, the DPP areas? Um, Government has taken a clear decision about which model it wants to see implemented. Obviously, default assumption is that's going to happen, with a view to those shadow elections next year and mayoral election, hopefully the year after that. But I don't know that they know how they're going to respond if
Mm.
after next week there's just a much higher level of opposition locally in some of these places. And again, I'm not speaking specifically about Hampshire here necessarily, but in some of these places, if the level of opposition from councils really increases to both sides of the agenda,
Yeah,
um, I mean, the history of the past 12 months tells us that this government
can bend.
does shift its, does make U-turns on things when it's under pressure.
Okay.
And it let not, yeah. And then obviously we have this even higher level uncertainty potentially about leadership and composition of the cabinet and all the rest of it, in Westminster, that it's just impossible to predict, I would say, because there's just so many variables about what happens.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Akash. What an absolute treasure trove of insights. I could talk to you about this for a long time, but I do suggest people have a look at Akash's work and the Institute for Government. There's a whole page on devolution, lots of resources and further in-depth thinking. So thank you so much. That's brilliant. So time marches on, and I'd love to introduce the second speaker. Mark Rogers. For those of you who did join a little bit late because of our slight admin snafu, just to reintroduce Mark, he's the interim chief exec of the brand new Brighton and Sussex Strategic Authority, former CEO of Birmingham City Council, and then helped set up the strategic authorities in Hull and East Yorkshire and the East Midlands. So is very much with hand on the tiller in terms of devolution in Sussex. So really delighted to have Mark zooming in live from the USA. Mark, over to you.
Over to me involves coming off mute. Thank you. Well, good morning. It is morning here. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of day you are most enjoying at this present time. So thank you very much for the invitation as well. I'm very pleased that I'm following Akash, because I will now say some more things that are correct rather than speculative. So that's always helpful. I'm going to dwell on this first slide ever so briefly, but I'm going to dwell on it. because you can see two different names. So Sussex and Brighton Combined County Authority and then Sussex and Brighton Strategic Authority. If I was being a complete pain, I could add a third that would be Sussex and Brighton Mayoral Strategic Authority. And I want to play around with the taxonomy just briefly because it's actually really important apropos the election issue. The present political leadership in Brighton and Hove, East and West Sussex, is clear that it would like and therefore is having the new authority titled as Strategic Authority. From my perspective, I'm always going to say Mayoral Strategic Authority, just waiting a bit longer than normal. But I think it's really important to understand that because, as Akash has set out, if government does complete the kind of devolution landscape across England, there will be different types of authority that are created. And this one in Sussex and Brighton is still very clearly intended to be a mayoral strategic authority. And we're just going to drop the old language of combined county authority, partly because the legislation's pretty well done now, isn't it? And this is the new language of devolution where mayors exist. So that may sound like a kind of pedant's introduction, really, but I think it's really important. You will hear me, you will hear colleagues, you will hear the kind of wider partnership, I hope, over time, just get into the habit of talking about the Sussex and Brighton Strategic Authority and that we are awaiting our mayor. So I kind of, how do you make them right? Let's do that, see if it moves it on. Yeah, cool. So I'm not going to start with the plumbing, although I'll talk about a little bit of that in a moment. I'm very keen to start with what some of you may look at that and go, oh, more motherhood and apple pie. I always thought that motherhood and apple pie were kind of reasonable things to have in life. So let's have some. But really, the point I want to make here, and I will really attempt to curtail my sort of sense of irony about things at times. So why I want to start here is because actually the most important thing we can do in setting up this new institution is to think about how we are setting up this new institution. Richard, you have said to people, I've kind of been in this kind of position before. So one would hope that the team and I and others kind of know how to make one in terms of the technical side of things, but we're really interested in ensuring that it's its nature, if you like, its character or its culture that we are as focused on, because actually one of the key determinants for success of these new institutions is the set of values that drive them forwards, frankly. So, this is our starting point. This will evolve, but we do want to make it clear that with relatively limited kind of contribution to this so far, because we are just starting up, but it's clearly the intention that we create an organisation that genuinely does kind of put the communities and the businesses of the area at the centre of what it's doing, that it is open and accountable, strong. And I didn't need to read all of this for you. The point is, it's to be a values-driven organisation, not a Lego kit assembly instruction creation. So let's kind of just get into kind of, where are we? I mean, you've largely heard from Akash anyway, kind of where all the DPP6, as they're called, kind of are in the process. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this either. But we have got, and I think I hope there are many more behind us, but Akash has raised the question as to whether there will be. But we have got a single strategic authority for Sussex and Brighton. And that's important. Our statutory instrument went through, we had our first meeting, all of those things mean that there isn't really a reverse gear, which I think is enormously helpful. I think there may have been some people for a moment in time between December and March who were wondering whether this would continue forwards. It will do. And I guess I want to leave people on the call in no doubt that we're on the move. And just to emphasise again that, we have to wait until May 2028 for the mayoral election. And that will make for an additional kind of interesting issue for us, which is how do you operate a strategic authority that's going to have a mayor but doesn't have one in the short to medium term, but will almost certainly draw its chair from the constituent bodies that make it up. So there's an interesting issue that all of us will probably want to think about, and certainly some of us are already working on. I'm not going to go into every little bit of this slide, not least because we'll very happily share the slides with everybody. But again, I want to give you a sense of, if we're starting from a position of, are we building it through a values lens? Also kind of what strategic functionality are we building here? So I have no intention really to go through a kind of long list of the parts that make up a strategic authority. I want to kind of talk about the kind of strategic functions that this new organisation will want to press forward with. And the bit in the middle is crucial, like giving one voice for Sussex and Brighton. Again, it sounds like another kind of phrase, doesn't it, that you might come up with. But it is really important that let's remember that way back in 15, 16, when we had that kind of first generation of city deal type combined authorities, the Greater Manchesters, the West Midlands, what the government at that time, and I still believe at this time, wanted was to be able to speak to the region easily, and for the region to be able to speak back with one voice as well. It doesn't mean that there aren't processes behind that about arriving at one voice, but this is for Sussex and Brighton to be able to speak to government, to be able to speak to UK PLC, and to be able to speak nationally. It's really important to kind of be saying that this is essentially a national and an international institution. Okay, it's a regional strategic authority, and it has four kind of key areas of functionality. It is to be strategic. This is not a local authority. It's not a council. It is going to be responsible for making decisions that shift the dial for the region and the country. All tiers of government have a contribution to make to that, but this tier of government, for me at least, it's very clear what it's for. It is strategically place making in Sussex and Brighton, and with the intention of this place contributing nationally and internationally to growth. Frankly, it has a really important way of working for me. It needs to be convening. It needs to be encouraging collaboration. Actually, it needs to be inclusive. I put another word in here, but there's probably just not enough space. We need to be inclusive. We need to be collaborative, and we need to be consensual in the way that we debate and reach decisions. Again, that will be something that we focus really hard on. These authorities, the old ones and the new ones, are built on a model that the key determinant for success of which is collaboration. The second you get into contested spaces and start voting in a really formalized way, then you can end up in trouble. So there's a very strong emphasis in the political and the non-political spaces on convening and collaborating and being consensual, recognizing difference but not allowing difference to interfere with progress. It is a shaper, it's a system leader. The opportunity that the chair will have initially and the mayor in due course will be to lead a whole set of organisations, communities and interests across the Sussex and Brighton area, and to do the best that we can kind of collectively to shape the future for the region and its contribution to the nation in a kind of systematic and systemic way. Again, we see this at other tiers of government, but in particular, mayors are being encouraged not just to think about their powers, to think about their influence in how to convene the system. And then finally, we are inclusive growth machines. There is already an investment fund allocated to this new body. It's modest. They've all been modest. We all like to scale them up and talk about how many billions worth of pounds there are in these, because we add all the numbers up over 30 years. There's a much more important point about these investment funds. They're not the prize. They're not the ultimate prize. They're leveraged towards the ultimate prize, which is bringing in much more investment sometimes by having compelling cases for government, which might have some money left, but much more about how we bring in both domestic and foreign investment in to kind of grow either new but more likely kind of boost existing sectors so that we are really clear that we're drawing in money to build on our strengths. So I'll move on, but just to kind of give a sense of those four kind of functions or characteristics of the strategic authority, all designed to give Sussex and Brighton a really strong voice nationally and internationally. There's a nice picture, hey? We kept it largely quiet because we're in the pre-election period, but the board met for the first time on the 15th of April, and look at them, they all put their nice suits on, scrubbed up their shoes, and we had a really congenial but constructive meeting that got the organisation up on its 2 feet. So a really important moment in time, and a disappointment really, not that we had the meeting, a disappointment that the meeting needed to take place in the pre-election period. Otherwise there would have been balloons and sparklers and all kinds of things to kind of celebrate what is a significant step forwards. You can be as interested or uninterested in this slide as you want to be, except for the bottom box, which we all need to be really focused on. So we have, from the off the back of that inaugural meeting, set up the kind of first set of governance arrangements. It is really important. I talked about transparency being a kind of key feature of the way we want to go forward. So, having strong governance is important, whether that's overview and scrutiny boards or whatever. So these things are falling into place. We've got statutory officers. So there was a subtle shift in my title from interim chief officer to interim chief exec. You can kind of go to your thesaurus if you want to kind of understand what the difference between those two things are. I think what they really represent is a move from a program to an organisation. Okay, that'd be my definition of the shift. But what it also means is we can operate entirely with all the kind of legal underpinnings that we need to now, finance, legal and head of paid service. The key bit is at the bottom, the strategic framework, and I'm going to shift to another slide really, because the strategic framework encapsulates all of the work that we need to be doing, and the shorthand for all of this is the development of a prosperity strategy. So there you go. That's a kind of nice simplified diagram. The wiring behind it is becoming more and more kind of complex. But in terms of the purpose of this organisation, so if it's to be a single voice for Sussex and Brighton, and that voice is intended to leverage investment in the things that will make most difference positively to people and businesses in the region and in the country, then a prosperity strategy is essentially an inclusive growth strategy. It is the expression of, in due course, the mayor's, but not yet, the board and partners and stakeholders' ambitions for the region. And we have commenced that work. Ironically, we commenced it just around the point that the elections were deferred. But I think that was also symbolic that we carried on. So the prosperity strategy work continues. There's some statutory stuff we have to do. We need a local growth plan that leans into government's industrial strategy. So what that really means is we need to be clear about which sectors we think in the region are the strongest for future investment. And then in doing that, persuade government that they also contribute to delivering the national industrial strategy, because actually they match up or complement the 8 sectors in that particular plan. And then we have to start developing a spatial development strategy, the so-called SDS, spatial plan, which, as you can see, is kind of euphemistically described as where we will focus growth and investment. I expect lots of people will go, housing. It will incorporate housing, but it's about a wider set of kind of infrastructure investments than that. But we need to crack on actually with spatial development strategies, not least, I don't know, Akash, whether you know this for certain, but there are definitely noises coming out of government that they might want to accelerate the timetable for these strategies. So yeah, well, we thought we would probably do a lot of the spade work up to the arrival of the mayor, but not get ahead of the mayor in terms of some of the kind of statutory consultation and all of that side of things. We are wondering whether government's going to kind of speed that timetable up, possibly in connection with kind of the next general election. Um, so just worth kind of keeping an eye on that. And then sitting kind of underneath all of this are a range of other things that we just absolutely kind of have to develop policy strategy and delivery for. All of which informed by evidence up the side of this. Evidence informed, I think, is accompanied by kind of politically led, two kind of nice, neat phrases, but the way we'll arrive at an agreed prosperity strategy should be a nice confluence of political ambition informed by evidence. No intention of running through this slide, but you can see how busy we're going to be. There is a lot that a strategic authority is responsible for. And you can see all of those things. And Akash, I think we have got this right up to date in terms of all the kind of core competencies now. That's right, isn't it? Rural affairs and culture kind of came to.
Nine, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Those were the two extra ones added during scrutiny in the Lords.
Yeah, there was literally during ping pong, but that's what we've ended up. So we've got more competencies than we started out with, and long may that continue in many respects. But you can see the range and depth and breadth of activity that we are going to be undertaking. And I would point out that whilst the most important thing we can do is kind of write strategies that lead to investment, that lead to making a difference with that investment. We're also growing the functionality of this new organisation. So by April next year, it will become the Fire and Rescue Authority for Sussex and Brighton, and it's already in a process of bringing together the East and the West Sussex Fire and Rescue Authority and service arrangements under the Strategic Authority, and the year after, the functions of the Office of the Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner also come to this new body. So there's also a kind of growing range of kind of statutory responsibilities, which is why you see public safety as one of the competencies for which a strategic authority is responsible for. And if you thought that one was reasonably busy, have a look at that one. I looked at this one a little earlier and thought there's a lot in here, and there may be a sense of lots of governance. There is lots of governance because there needs to be good decision making, transparent decision making, and accountability locally and nationally. But what I want to kind of say about all of this is the bit that should leap out at you is the Sussex and Brighton prosperity strategy. All of this is designed to corral stakeholders, partners, and actually we call them principal authorities. I think now we can move on from calling constituents to principal authorities, corralling all of that to deliver a strategy that drives investment in the things that will make most difference for us all. So again, I'm not going to dwell on this because you'll be able to take the slides away. I've talked about the new money. You know about the new money. I think for quite a long time, there's been some, kind of publicity about the money that will come in through being a priority program devolution area. I think what's really interesting is there'll be some greater flexibility about how that money is used. And as Akash referred to a little earlier, following, no, well, the Mays lecture that the Chancellor did relatively recently, teased us with the prospect of, I think, what I might call tax assignment. So let's be clear, she's not offering areas the ability to raise taxes. She's offering areas the potential to explore whether the funding that they receive might be delivered in a different way, including by kind of like taking an element of something like income tax, which I think that's most likely to be where they start, but taking an element of income tax, and that replacing shorter term grant funding, giving sort of longer term recurrent funding streams that might leverage borrowing, for example, much more water to flow under that particular bridge. But I just think a massive opportunity to leverage investment into the region. at a scale that individual organisations and authorities haven't been able to do. And then this is just kind of a bit, I think I'm nearly at the end, actually. This is just a bit of information about kind of, so what is different? These are regional inclusive growth investment vehicles, okay, if you want a bit of kind of jargon. And why are they different from local authorities, for example, or why are they different from the local enterprise partnerships that we used to have in the past, or the RDAs even further back? Essentially, they are going to be bodies whereby really significant kind of multi-year investment pots are created, that will drive investments at a much greater scale than has been hitherto possible. So the prosperity strategy is really important in unlocking that capability that is coming to the region, because if we are clear on the things that will make the most difference, then that will be we'll be able to use that to persuade investors to make long-term commitments here, and long-term commitments to really significant infrastructure and sectoral growth.
We've got
Yes.
lots of really interesting questions, Mark. Are we able to move to those in a second? Oh, there we
Look
go.
at that.
Beautiful. Right. Thank you for that. Really, really helpful. And I think for those that have not met you, I think it's a really good opportunity for people to hear, direct from you about how a lot of this is working and going to work over the next coming months and years. So I'm going to try and answer as many of the questions as I can, but there's lots of them and they're all good. So apologies if I group some of them together. There's a lot around sort of
Okay.
governance and accountability. But the first one is the name. It seems to be a bone of contention for many, many people. Why Sussex and Brighton? Why not Sussex? Or if you're the other end of the spectrum, why not Brighton City Region? I can probably imagine why not that one, but why not just Sussex Strategic Authority?
Well, I'm probably going to resort to a technical answer because that's what it says in the statute that created us. And there was a discussion last year with the previous minister, Jim McMahon, about the name of the authority, and that is the name that government settled upon.
So it wasn't Brighton strong arming its way in, as some have said, or there's not is it due to a kind of another convention? Julian makes the point about York and North Yorkshire, or was it something fairly arbitrary, do you think? But
Well, probably all of those things.
right.
But I think the most important thing to point out is that it is actually what Jim McMahon decided the
Yeah.
name was going to be.
Um, So, question from Southeast Climate Alliance. Since mayors have not been given duties to act on climate and nature, how is the authority going to make sure that they have these at the heart of decisions and maintain and accelerate action? And that's been sort of backed up with one from Emily O'Brien as well, just kind of saying climate action seems to have dropped off the investment framework that's been shown, even though it is a competency. What's the process for agreeing the investment framework, and essentially where can climate and environment come back into it?
Yeah, so I think so. The strength of having competencies is that you can see explicitly what they are. I think the weakness of having competencies is that it masks the fact that strategic authorities have a general power of competence. They are expected to and can act in all respects that would not be contrary to law, I think is probably some vague definition of the general power of competence. I, so I also want to be clear that just because it doesn't say some things on the tin doesn't mean they're not in the tin. But I also think that there's a much more important kind of way of looking at this, which is as we formulate the prosperity strategy, the kind of engagement that we've started with and need to ramp up and kind of continue with will be such that it will become clear which agendas are the most important agendas for Sussex and Brighton. And I see a positive inevitability for issues to do with nature and climate being in there. They will just find their way in there in a way that reflects what Sussex and Brighton interests are, rather than because a competency says do this, do that. And there will be responsibility for kind of nature recovery strategies. There will be responsibility for protecting the environment. There will be responsibility for kind of net zero. So honestly, I think this is more that we just haven't kind of taken all the contents of the tin out, but also there needs to be a process that's driven by the area, not simply driven by the kind of statutory framework that we're working to. So we need to come at this through our own dialogue, through our own negotiation, through our own prioritisation. But I would,
So to
be
group
alarmed
together
at this stage.
a few questions from Karen and Paul and Richard, a few others around basically a sort of accountability, engagement, not a paucity of public awareness around this. Not a lot of people still know that this is happening.
Yeah.
Engagement's kind of been light, but then a deeper question of how do all the different constituent parts of Sussex, and as we know, different communities have different needs. How deep and wide is the true engagement going to be beyond sort of tick box consultations, and how will that be long lasting, and how will that influence how decisions are made?
Yeah, so I think maybe the most important thing to say about that is now that we kind of exist, properly exist, we can begin to construct the kind of capacity and capabilities we need to do engagement more thoroughly and over time. So there's an absolute commitment to kind of scaling up our ability to actually engage, whether it's in the formulation of the prosperity strategy overall or in particular kind of subject matter areas that we need to. And I think also kind of what I would point to is that because the success of these institutions are founded on their ability to engage and engender collaboration and kind of consensual decision making, that will all the more strengthen our arm in investing in basically people who can support the process of engagement and in due course kind of consultations and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's probably a case of watch this space as we scale up and are able to do much more engagement than we have been able to up to this point.
And we're going to hear from Natalie in a minute on the very kind of subject of insight and sort of independent data. But how will, from your perspective, how will the authority be collecting data,
Mm.
and not just numerical stuff from ONS, but the sort of the kind of
Yeah.
qualitative data that really shows proper need, inequality, growth potential, all that sort of stuff that comes from the bottom up rather than the top down?
Uh, I, I think you probably know this answer as well as I do, Richard, from some limited discussions we've had already. But we will do a number of things. So I guess first of all, we are wanting to assemble in a way that makes sense the kind of whole wealth of data that exists in the area, but actually isn't yet aligned, let alone integrated. So there's something about what have we already got. So there will definitely be kind of calls for data and analysis and insight that already exists, and that'll be a case of sort of synthesizing it. We will definitely commission work to fill in gaps or to build stronger cases for things that we know are most likely to be kind of priority areas within the strategy. And I think also you will just see the team get out more and more and do, I guess, what you might call some softer engagement, which is kind of just meeting with individuals, with groups, whether they're of geography or interest, just to get a better sense of the place, so that once we start to kind of assemble a kind of more organized and integrated set of data that supports the strategy, we've also got kind of that sense of interpretation from talking to people, not just interpretation from spreadsheets.
Hmm. So I hope, and there's lots of questions around, from different sectors and how people can feed in and stuff. So I hope broadly that answers that. Thank you. Very one last quick question
Yeah.
before we move on to Natalie, which is another governance one from Chris, specifically about the board. How was the board chosen? Is that a statutory thing? Who are they accountable
Yeah.
to? And is once the mayor's in place, really how much actual democratic power will that board have?
Okay, so it is set out in the statutory instrument. The board has three tiers of membership. I'll do this really quickly, but it does have three tiers of membership. So the principal authorities are entitled to nominate what's called a lead and a deputy lead member. Hitherto, in I think everywhere around the country, that's been the leader and the deputy leader of those principal authorities. So that is the first kind of tier of membership, and that is, previously the constituent membership, now the principal membership. They are entitled voting members of the board. So whilst we presently have Brighton and Hove and East and West Sussex, we will have 6 board members who are voting members of the board. That will almost certainly change at some point when local government reorganisation finds its way through and we know how many unitaries will be in the area in due course, and then that membership, if it needs to be, will be adjusted, presumably upwards rather than downwards, but we'll see. And then we have 2 other tiers of membership. One is called associate membership and the other is called non-constituent membership. Associate membership is that those 6 voting members of the board are able to bring onto the board people who are able to provide expert advice in particular domains of interest. Non-constituent membership is where you can have a representative body represented on the strategic authority. So that has normally been district and borough councils. In other places where there have been 2 tiers of local government. In some places it's also included police and crime commissioners if that's not already been integrated into the organisation. Associate and non-constituent places have not been determined yet because actually the board hasn't had its first annual general meeting, which is likely to be in kind of late June, early July. But that is the membership of the board. It's set out in law. So it will be more a case of what do the voting members of the board think the board would most benefit from in terms of expert advice as associates, and how non-constituent, i.e. district and borough, and maybe possibly other representative interests are included. When the mayor comes along, the mayor takes the chair, but in the short term, one of the 6 voting members from the 3 constituent authorities will, I assume, be elected to the chair of this organisation at the AGM.
Thank you so much. Really comprehensive answers. And again, time is not on our side, but I'm sure we can pick up some of those things and go in more depth in other parts of this project. So to Natalie, and again, for those that joined late, or our fault, not yours, just to reintroduce Natalie Orringe, founder of Strategy and Impact, public communications and engagement expert. And we're going to pick up those points about kind of data engagement and the sort of independent information and intelligence that will be shaping, we hope, a lot of things in Sussex in the future. Natalie, over to you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Rich. And actually, Rich, I'm going to ask for some help because my slides have just managed to crash. So maybe could you share my slides if that's doable? I'm actually picking up on some of the conversations that we've been having through today about how we as a region start to help shape some of the decision making underway. And I guess as part of that, I've been in conversations with Rich and involved in Sussex and the City and the Sussex Futures Network for the past year. And in those conversations, been thinking about how do we, as a stakeholder group, almost come together to shape decision making. Rich, how are you doing?
Nearly there. Sorry.
Great. Sorry, everyone. So what we're about to talk today is a partnership between myself, Richard, and Bruce Nairn of Nairn Consulting to launch Sussex Intelligence. And really, what we're creating is what we hope will become an independent, objective, really a repository for insight and evidence that we hope will support decision makers across the region. Just jumping onto the next slide, Rich. And as we've talked about today, what's really obviously fundamentally changing is the way in which decision making is happening at all levels. And I know from being chair of a charity, from being involved in conversations with businesses across Sussex, that it feels very daunting to understand how and why and where to get involved. So what we're hoping to do with Sussex Intelligence is to create an independent evidence base shaped for and by people who live in Sussex. It will be cross-sector. We will bucket our research, the evidence, the insights that we share into 4 parts. The first one will look at growth and growth in its broadest sense, economy, productivity, skills, innovation, but also more broadly as we sort of evolve and build out the Sussex Intelligence Unit, thinking about the environment, climate change, net zero, and so on. So thinking about what the drivers of what this economy, our system looks like. We'll then move on to think about infrastructure, housing, transport, and the first briefing that we've published this week looks at transport across the region. How does that shape the way in which people engage with and are part of Sussex? Governance, policy decision-making, how far do people feel able to be part of where we are in the organisation and where we are in Sussex? And then belonging, and I'm really pleased to share that our very first research project is underway with the support of the Undulata Foundation, and I know Undulata are on the call, so huge thank you to them. Just on the next slide, Rich. I should probably come up with some prompt, I think, for how to change the slides. So as I've mentioned, the first project that we've got underway, which went live this morning, is the Sussex Belonging Survey. You can find out more on sussexintelligence.com. And again, that survey is open to everybody. We're intending that to be a longitudinal study that we will keep open for a period of time, publish quarterly, publish 6 monthly, but look to update it around key milestones so we can start to see how belonging varies by location, by area, but over time, and how it's impacted by policy milestones. Alongside commission research, we're also going to publish regular briefings. As I mentioned, the first 2 of those are now live. The first one looks at the Sussex economy, what it's worth, how it's changed, how does it track against South East in England. And the second one is about transport, how that impacts on people's engagement and sense of belonging in Sussex. Again, the aim of those briefings are really to share data that's out there, but to cut it through the Sussex lens and make it available to decision makers so that, again, if you're coming up to thinking about policy or strategy, you've got data that you can rely on and will be useful. And we're also hoping that people will also share research that they might think is going to be useful to decision makers in Sussex. So there is a LinkedIn page that's already live, and we'll be doing our very best to collate, curate, and share research that we come across, both through the website and on LinkedIn. Just on to the next slide, Rich. So probably not relying on us for our tech capability, but maybe separately relying on us for our evidence base. I would say that we're really keen to partner with you to promote research you might have underway. And if there is work that you think it'd be useful for us to partner on or to be part of working with you on, then please do get in touch. We are working on a commission basis. I've mentioned the belonging survey that's with the support of Undulata. And again, if there are questions that you've got coming up and you're looking for research and want to understand how that might work, then please do get in touch. And perhaps above all, and I think this is really building on the strength of what's been achieved through Sussex in the City, so much of what we can do is help us as a community, as a region, come together and share insight, expertise, perspectives. So we'd really value feedback on LinkedIn. We'd really encourage you to share thoughts, ideas. And again, we will, between us, be trying to join this into Sussex and the City and the Sussex Futures Network. So if you are interested in finding out more, please check us out on LinkedIn or do get in touch via email directly. So that's it. Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to being in touch.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much. Apologies for less than perfect tech here, but hey, we're all human. So I'm going to, if it's all right, just do a little quick summary of Sussex and the City, just some of the learning that we've had, particularly around engagement and talking to different sectors, and little quick whiz sort of headline summaries. We've done 72 long-form conversations, the focus being trying to turn this technical governance reform process into a live civic conversation. So 72 conversations, 110 people, 20 essays and blogs have been submitted. We've got nearly 70 hours of audio so far, and this is really just the beginning. Trying to build this qualitative set of hopes, fears, practical asks, bridging the strategic decision-making and grassroots organisations and networks, building a kind of shared evidence base as this evolves in sort of real time. So I just thought I'd share some headlines of what people have been saying and how we think that can positively help shape all of these things that Akash and Mark have been talking about, and the great questions that you've been having, particularly around sort of governance and focus and engagement. So from all our conversations, how are people feeling? Well, what we're getting the sense is that people like the idea of more local power, but they're not quite sure whether it's going to be their power. People are optimistic, but feel kind of poorly informed. Lots of interest in local power and investment. I think there's a sense that change is good, but it needs to be the right good. There is obviously concern about speed, clarity, and purpose. This isn't a conversation we've been having in Sussex for decades, unlike other parts of the country. There is a weak public understanding of what changes and when, and there's a fear that this is a kind of new regional layer that's not genuine devolution. But with the question, kind of, will this make things better here, and how do we help make these things better here, rather than burn it all down? It shouldn't happen. There is some confusion between reorganisation and devolution, of course, because of the way these things have conflated. But, whilst hesitant, most people have at the end kind of said, this could be a good thing. We're just not quite sure what it is yet. And so I've been trying to be as broad as I can in terms of who we've been having conversations with. So just some quick headlines. I think different groups, what we say, kind of mapping devolution onto their own bottlenecks, which is sort of understanding that that's happening, understandable that that's happening, whilst the whole process is thinking systemically, and the institutions involved and probably represented at board level are thinking systemically. Obviously, communities and grassroots organisations are thinking locally, and the challenge is to bridge that gap. I won't go through all of these, and I will share these slides, but just some quick headlines that education can see this as a platform for skills, research, innovation, and working more closely with the new economy. Young people are seeing this as a potential opportunity around transport. That's a really, really big topic coming up, but also jobs and the ability to stay in Sussex. Housing is going to be crucial. So what's the offer to them? They would like to see that tangible. The voluntary community sector, interested in how this can support better prevention, joined up support, but worried about funding instability and complexity. The cultural sector, I know there's been debates in the chat, hopeful about a stronger regional story, but could be reduced to sort of tourism or an economic nice to have, rather than the core role that culture plays in cohesion and place. So lots of different views coming through, but how we contain multitudes and represent that's really important. What are people most worried about? Well, I think all of those things have sort of come up today in the chat. Local voice weakened and not accountability, transition paralysis as it becomes a sort of administrative process rather than actually focused on the big vision. The environment is secondary to kind of development and growth concerns, that it brings maybe more complexity, not less. And it feels like a bigger system that's distant rather than one that properly speaks for and to coastal towns, rural areas, young people, small businesses, etc. But people are really cognizant of where a big difference can happen, and feeling that that's what Sussex needs, and it's a good time for it, even if it's sort of been a little bit fast-tracked and maybe imposed. So the common themes, there's an opportunity for a stronger Sussex story, identity and investment case, transport, particularly east to west, skills and training aligned with real future economy jobs, growth in tech, creative, health, manufacturing, the things that we know we're good at but could be better at and do a bit more at scale, nature and environment as economic and social assets, increased social mobility, distribution of opportunity, and simpler, more coherent support for what is a very small and micro business economy. So the message recurring through lots and lots of different leaders from different sectors is this an opportunity to connect existing assets, universities, businesses, natural capital, civic energy, which is so strong in Sussex, into a shared sort of operating system. What people have said they'd love a mayor to focus on first and maybe to avoid, it's all about communication and vision. Make the system understandable, deliver early wins and talk about it, align different elements together and involve people in that process, build trust through clear communication, and convene existing strengths and expertise, not just reinventing the wheel, and avoiding the traps of things like over-centralisation, lack of transparency, maybe obsessing around structure rather than getting things done and involving people and getting things done. Obviously, party politics over place need, and we've seen how that, we can learn from how other areas have done that well, and an imbalance of kind of focus. But I think the key thing coming through, if you could sum it up, any ask for a new mayor is, your most powerful role, and for the authority as a whole, is to convene and advocate rather than necessarily sort of drive, too narrow an agenda. And I think some of the themes that, we're really early days with this, and I think, as Mark set out, we're literally weeks from when this whole system became a legal thing. But some of the interesting conversations that certainly in Sussex and the City we'll be exploring more, and through the intelligence unit, is how place becomes the organising principle, the use of data and its interpretation, and where that's coming from and who's feeding into it. Inequality in Sussex becoming a real focus for how and where resources are driven. The idea of Sussex identity is not one place or one economy or one political culture, but it can be more than the sum of its parts if there is a kind of collaborative story. How anchor institutions like universities can be real part of place engines of opportunity, growth and environment being not seen as a zero-sum game. How do we put water, land, climate, health, and economy as interdependent parts of the system, etc., etc. So there's so many rich areas that we can continue to explore. So if you're not engaged with the project to date, I hope that you do join us. Lots of free podcasts, blogs, bulletins. We may even go back up to a weekly podcast soon, because there's so much rich. So many rich voices out there that have been contributing and have something to say. We want to hear from everybody that is impacted by and will have an impact on this. So just a little quick whistle stop tour there, and I will share all that. But obviously, I will encourage you to go and have a deep dive in the podcasts and the blogs and the think pieces. There's a year's worth of them now. So, I guess just in the last few minutes, happy to address any kind of final burning questions, and can pick up anything that that we haven't covered. Yes, slides will be shared, etc., etc. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm kind of gonna throw open the floor a little bit. If anyone wants to speak, put your hand up and ask a quick question in the dying minutes. I think a lot of the things in the chat are kind of debate and points. Or we'll close it. Oh, Vivian, floor is yours. If you can keep it to sort of under a minute, that would be great. Hi, Vivian, come on in. No. Okay, we can't hear you if you are talking. Okay, well, you know what? We'll conclude early, because I think that there's a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of really interesting stuff. So grateful for Akash, to Mark, to Natalie for giving time and candid sort of reflections on where we're at and where we're doing. Judging by the comments in the chat, people have found it really useful. Sorry for the admin and the tech glitches. We're all human here and all trying to bring all this together in rapid time on a bit of a shoestring. So really appreciate it. But thank you so much to everyone who's engaged so far. All the slides will be shared, and we'll put a link to the Sussex Intelligence Unit stuff as well in a follow-up email. But once again, massive thanks and virtual applause to Akash, to Mark, and to Natalie for bringing all of this to life.